So I've had a lot of people message me about the new A1 Mark II release. Now I do have the A1 original and the A1 Mark II with me right now, and they're wanting to know, should I upgrade? Now they are working professionals, they're making money from their A1. Is the A1 Mark II a significant upgrade enough to obviously upgrade to this camera? Will they actually, be getting this camera to help their workflow or just bring them something new that they don't have in this camera? That's what I want to discuss in this video. But also, if you don't have either of these, is it worth picking up a second-hand A1, or is it worth just jumping over and going for the A1 Mark II? Let's get it. Now firstly, we'll talk about the exterior updates. One of the things that I do like that is obviously in my A7 Mark IV is that photo, video, and S&Q switch. Now the A1 original didn't have that, but the A1 Mark II has that photo, video, and S&Q switch. Just makes it easier if you are a hybrid shooter going from photo to video. Now we do see a larger body. It's the exact same body that's on the A9 Mark III. So if you do actually have the A9 Mark III cage, which I actually do, this fits on it absolutely perfect. One thing that's pretty interesting, and when it comes to professionals, we're going to be using the side ports, and this has a door for every single port, which is extremely good, because previously in the A1, if you opened one door, you might actually have 3 different things in there, or 2 different things, your headphone or your 3.5mm jack. You kind of want to separate that sometimes because you don't want one open and you're not using the other one because dust could get inside. As professionals, you're going to be throwing this in a whole bunch of crazy situations, which is expected, and you want this to last, to be the best it can be for a long period of time. So it's a great addition to the A1 Mark II. Now the A1 Mark II actually gets that amazing flip screen that we do see in the A9 and the A7R Mark V, where it flips absolutely every single way. So it's going to please photographers and videographers who like to do portrait, landscape, selfie, top-down shots, down-low shots. There's a whole bunch of different angles you can put this in. It's the best flip screen that you can get with Sony. In my opinion, I absolutely love this thing. Now there is a slight improvement of the EVF. You do have a slightly better refresh rate, but it still is that 9.44 million dot EVF, which is absolutely fantastic. Now this one has that C5 button that we do see on the A9 Mark III, which gives you that boost in photography, and it's very accessible. It's in a really, really good spot just for your finger to sort of sit on, and then once you obviously, press that, hit the shutter button, it's going to increase the frame rate that you're actually going to get in your stills. And it is capped out at 30 frames per second, so it's not as good as the A9 Mark III where you get 120 frames per second, but still a fantastic performance, specifically at 50 megapixels. Now in terms of recording, they both have the Type A cards, which obviously are dual SD cards as well, but obviously Type A cards are very expensive, but they're much faster. And we're definitely not going to be seeing any differences anytime soon when it comes to the battery. The Z100 batteries are perfectly fine. Now, because the A1 came at a time where the AI processor chip wasn't in the Sony cameras, this one gets the new AI processor. Now that handles so much when it comes to autofocus performance, when it comes to a few other features that we will discuss. Now 5 stops of image stabilization was pretty much the standard when it came to the IBIS in most of the Sony cameras, but 8.5 stops of IBIS. That is pretty incredible for the A1 Mark II. And does that actually translate to the footage here? I'm not 100% sure if I do see too much of a difference, but if we do actually use dynamic active stability, you're going to get some insane smooth footage going forward and back. And it's just incredible. It is almost gimbal-like. And when it comes to that, sure, it does crop in at about 30%, but because this is a 50.1 megapixel sensor, it's going to be cropping in on the sensor, but you're not going to be losing too much resolution as you do with the ZV-E1, because the ZV-E1 is a 12 megapixel sensor, ends up being about 10.2 megapixels by the time you crop into that 16:9 frame. And then if you're cropping in another 30%, you're going to be losing so much resolution. But with the A1 Mark II, that crop in isn't really that noticeable. Now you also get that auto reframing, and like I said with the ZV-E1, that also has that auto reframing, but it's a smaller resolution sensor. This is a larger resolution sensor, so you're not going to see too much downgrades when it actually crops in on the frame. But it's a pretty interesting feature, but I don't think a lot of professionals that are actually going to be buying this are probably going to be using that feature. Now, because of that AI processor as well, you do have image stabilizer. So essentially if you do a whole bunch of walking shots, it's going to crop in and move the frame kind of like auto reframing, but you're actually moving and, walking along. So if you're doing a tracking shot, it's going to be actually really good to use because it automatically crops in for you, stabilizes the image using not just the IBIS and active stability inside the camera, but also that digital stabilization to try and figure out, the best stability for that shot. Now, I think one of the best updates when it comes to the A1 Mark II happens to be the autofocus. So that AI processor allows us to have better human, animal, birds, insects, eye autofocusing, especially like when it comes to cars, planes, and trains. This is going to be so much more accurate in photo and video. And if you are a professional that relies on getting things in focus as much as possible, this is going to be an absolute worthy update. The AI processor is going to hopefully be going to be in all Sony cameras from now on, because that just gives you so much more reliability when it comes to autofocus. And I do have to stress that these are professional cameras, and these minor updates can actually be make or break for professionals who actually make money out of this. And having more usable shots, everything in focus all the time, is literally enough for someone to update to this camera. I think one of the most impressive things about the autofocus as well is that if you leave it in just auto recognition, it can recognize pretty much if it's a bird, animal, plane, car, human. That is pretty cool. You don't actually have to go into the human or the bird or the car. But if you do put it into, that specific setting, it's going to lock on that regardless. So if a person does walk in front, it won't focus on that person because you've actually got it in car autofocus. And obviously that is because of that new AI processor. So the A1 Mark II gets the pre-capture that we actually did see in the A9 Mark III. This one has that pre-capture. So essentially you can program it to, if you just half press the shutter, it's going to buffer a little bit. And then when you press that shutter down to whatever you've programmed it, let's say half a second, it's going to take half a second's worth of stills when you press that shutter button. So you're not going to miss an important part of the action. If you're doing bird wildlife photography, if you're doing sports photography and you really need, to make sure that you don't miss that shot, that's going to be a really good feature. So video shooters, what kind of video specs do we have between these two? Well, the A1 actually has 8K up to 30 frames per second. You've 10-bit, and then you've got 4K at 120 frames per second, 422 10-bit as well. And in the A1 Mark II, you have exactly the same. They haven't updated the frame rates when it comes to both of these cameras. Look, the hardware has slightly changed when it comes to that AI processor. Does that AI processor allow for future firmware updates to, get a little bit more frame rates because it's taking a little bit of processing power out of the main dual XR BIONZ processors? Not 100% sure, but I would love to see potentially a firmware update to give us a little bit more juice out of this. And also when it comes to video, both of these do record ProRes Raw externally into an Atomos recorder. So if you are into that, ProRes workflow, then definitely pick one of these up and you'll be sweet. Also, another feature you might like when it comes to videos is the ability to import your LUTs for monitoring. So if you do want to throw on a LUT here that you've created and monitor it in camera, you can actually do that, very similar to the Sony ZV-E1 and a couple of other new Sony cameras. Now, one feature that we do see in the A1 Mark II that we don't see in the A1 is actually video time-lapse. Now, if you go into the video settings, you can see time-lapse in there, and it just gives you a baked-in file of a video time-lapse, and it's just so much easier than doing photo time-lapse. Sure, photo time-lapses give you more flexibility and higher resolution files, but if you just want a really quick video time-lapse, you can smash it out with the A1 Mark II. Now look, when it comes to the stills and the actual shutter sound, it's pretty much exactly the same, but it definitely is the nicest of all the Sony cameras when it comes to that shutter sound. And both the A1 and A1 Mark II has the ability to do 30 frames per second continuous RAW shooting, not just JPEG, but RAW files. And they both have pixel shift mode where you can pretty much smash a whole bunch of photos together and give you a really high resolution photo. But the A1 Mark II actually has the new noise reduction shooting setting, which essentially you can choose up to 4 or 32 photos that it smashes in together, gets a really nice, crisp, clean image. Could be great for high res architecture or astrophotography or landscape photography. Now there's one small feature that the ZV-E1 got that the A1 Mark II has, and that happens to come down to the golden ratio when it comes to grid lines. So if you know rule of thirds, you have, cuts into thirds top and bottom. This one is a little bit different when it comes to the actual lines itself. I will put a link in the description below, and it'll actually talk about the golden ratio in much more detail than I can actually explain, because I only just learnt it. It's more of a photography based thing when it comes to framing and composition, and it's based on mathematical equations and all these kind of crazy things, but it's interesting. They've added an A1 Mark II. So absolute real talk, if you do have the A1, should you get the A1 Mark II? Look, it really depends on how much you're going to be selling your A1 and obviously how much money you've got for the A1 Mark II. But if money isn't really an issue, obviously that's a no-brainer. The A1 Mark II is a better camera all round. But if you are sort of strapped for cash and you don't really want to fork out a little bit extra, maybe don't upgrade as yet. But I do feel like the A1 Mark II has got a little bit more when it comes to being future-proof in terms of that AI processor, that flip screen, which for me is absolute game changer. I love that. And if you are someone looking to get into one of these two cameras, look, if you can pick up an A1 original secondhand at a really, really good price, I mean, that's a steal. You have to get that camera. But if you've got a little bit extra cash, definitely go for the A1 Mark II. So anyway, my friends, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up. Let me know which one you would choose if you bought it today. If you have the A1 and you're going to upgrade to the A1 Mark II, it's pretty interesting. I absolutely love the A1 Mark II, and I actually might buy this. I'm not 100% sure yet, but it definitely suits my workflow, and I do want to work with this a little bit more. But yeah, thanks for watching. See you guys in the next one. All right, let's go.